And there we are, live again. You're welcome back to the latest episode of Molby On The Spot for Anfield Index and Anfield Index Pro. This is, of course, Mr. Jan Molby with us, as per usual, as we look back on what has been a bit of a trying time in recent days and even weeks, if we're being honest, for the Reds, and look ahead to what we can expect. There are some very bright patches on the horizon, however, and of course, one major one. Good evening, Jan.
Yes, good evening, Trevor. It has indeed been trying, but it had also gone so smooth prior to that, hadn't it? So there's always a spell, isn't it? And if you're gonna have a spell, have it when you're 12 points clear.
It feels a lot, doesn't it? Like some people are leaning into the negativity when you have, as you say, a gap like that, and yet it was shrunk a little bit by a very bad result. Maybe even the result isn't so bad. The performance was appalling, which I think is what stuck in the craw. You can understand, I think, to a certain extent, if you look at it objectively, it's 3 defeats in the last 4 games. And two of those defeats are very consequential in terms of a cup final and exiting, the premier competition in football. And then to go back into the league where we're supposed to be having nothing else to think about now except that. We were hearing all the positive news and all the positive lines coming from people about having their head in the game and all the rest of it. It was hard to comprehend what exactly we were looking at, wasn't it, at the weekend there, Jan? We're looking at, it's going to be 8 Sundays in a row. I really struggled with what I was seeing on the pitch and trying to make any sense out of it. I think the tiredness thing is difficult to argue too much for. We are in a situation now where lads have a week off between each of these games, so the performances are going to have a serious uptick. Did you have any theory on why it was quite so appalling? And it was appalling.
We briefly touched it on the other week, Trevor, that this might just be our dodgy spell during the season, and there is no warnings. There was no warning. It sort of started PSG away, Southampton at home in the Premier League. Where we couldn't raise a gallop as a sort of an old-fashioned saying, isn't it? And ever since then, we just haven't been able to sort of, get our identity back into the way that we play. I think we've all been there, Trevor. As I said before, there's no warning. It's bizarre the way that it happens to a whole group of players, not just 1 or 2, but possibly 15, 20 players. And you can even have players who've hardly played this season who will also be affected by this sort of tiredness, unsharpness. I saw 1 or 2 people being a little bit uncomplimentary. I mean, I was a big fan of Paul Scholes as a player, and I actually think he's pretty straightforward as a pundit. And I was surprised that he felt the need to mention the word arrogant. There was a little arrogance about Liverpool. I just don't see that. I mean, it was probably the first game this season, the Fulham one we're talking about, where prior to the game, I felt there'd been a change in the way that the fans view the season, in that they were now talking about when. Whereas prior to that, we were talking about if and can we do it. And now we're sort of talking about when it's going to happen. And I just felt that maybe the pressure's off a little bit. Is that a good or bad thing? I don't know. But the bottom line is, Trevor, that we don't need many more points. And we got some very winnable games coming up, isn't it? So, as they say, Trevor, we go again, innit? We go again. But I have to say that, when you're in a spell like this as a player, we often talk about, I want to play every other day, because we're in great form. But when you're in a spell like this, you kind of don't look forward to the games either, because you're looking for something, you're looking for a trigger, whatever that trigger might be. It might come in training, it might come in the first minute of any game. So it is all these. It was never meant to be easy, was it? Playing elite sport, whatever that sport is, it was never meant to be easy. It's difficult, it's challenging. Some things are unexplainable, and I just think for the group that we've got and the way that we played basically all season, we are a little unrecognisable at the moment.
Yeah, and people can spin around looking for reasons for that. And of course, yeah, you're right. The arrogant one was thrown around a lot, and there's you can kind of almost justify the Scholes take when you see an apparent lack of inability to exert yourself in a game where there are such high stakes, and that's one way you could interpret it. But like we've said a million times, it's not as if these guys had character changes overnight and suddenly don't want the league. But psychologically, who knows what sort of pressures that have been on that squad and on that group recently. It was just a little bit unsettling. And when you say we've got winnable games ahead, I was listening to Dave's show today on the channel, and he said something very similar. And he was talking about the amount of Liverpool fans who are kind of wetting themselves, honestly, with anxiety about what's happening or could happen. And it's not much consolation, is it, that these are teams who are, doing very badly, because people have this muscle memory of Liverpool maybe not showing up against some of these kind of teams that are in the lower echelons of the league and making really hard work of it. So I think that's probably a combination of that. It's probably gotten into the players' heads as well. But one thing I can't understand, and this is what I'd love maybe if we could just pull apart a little bit from the Fulham game, is to see the real fall off that has happened with Virgil over the last couple of weeks, in terms of a couple of performances now where, people who are clever with video editing could have him on toast for the rest of the season and into next campaign, talking about, this is the great Virgil van Dijk, is he doing air kicks and stuff like that. Mo Salah, who is having an outrageous season, but has a good few games in a row now where we haven't seen any of that end product that the team has been so absolutely focused on. I think if you look at something like the final, you could say, well, he was starved at the ball. But maybe not so much in the most recent game against Fulham. So when you see that, when you see the really, really impressive footballers really struggling, is that something that can take hold as well? Are people looking to those guys to save the day every day? Can a team, even a team full of good footballers, and God knows you were part of loads of squads there at Anfield that were wonderful, packed to the gills with good footballers, but even those teams have their sort of talismanic figures, and if they're not doing it, can that seep in a little bit, do you think, into a group?
Yeah, of course it can. You do always look towards your leaders. I mean, the greatest moment you have is that when you don't need to look towards your leaders because everything is just going really well and you get on with it. Now, in terms of the two players you mentioned, I think Mo is easier to explain than possibly Virgil. Also because you look at Mo, and I still think Mo is a moment player. He has moments in games. Mo, you'll never come away from Anfield and going, did you see the way that Mo controlled the game today? Because that's not your job, is it? Did you see the way that Mo made us play? We played really, really well. And also, arguably for what he's already put in, there was also a lot of rumours about what he put in the close season to make sure he was absolutely spot on for this season. He's put it all in. Virgil's a little bit more difficult because of the position that he plays in. So a lot of the things he does is not on the same knife edge as it is with Mo, and also he has this sort of, he's almost faultless, isn't he, Trev? And that's why I'm finding it a little. So Mo's a goal scorer. He misses a chance. It's part of what you do, isn't it? And people say, well, as a defender, part of what you do is making mistakes, but it's not really if you're Virgil van Dijk, is it? So I'm a little bit baffled as why it's had him in that way over the last few weeks. Again, I wouldn't be worried beyond and extending his contract, and I think he's going to be absolutely fine, isn't it? But maybe he's just, I don't know, but it's almost like a subconscious thing where it's done now, and sometimes we always used to say, Trevor, it was a very sort of start quick and you can always go quicker. Start slow, and it can be very difficult to get the pace of the game. So maybe that's what it is. We just don't get off on the right foot. I know we took the lead at Fulham, isn't it? But it never looked like it was going to last. We just weren't in the game where we were. It was a match filled with uncharacteristic mistakes, really.
The way that the narrative of the match played out, I found it very interesting because people were doing a lot of lazy reporting, the usual stuff you get from pundits afterwards, and people were saying that Liverpool were great in the first 15 minutes, but then blah blah blah. Right now, I think McAllister scores in 13, and that's a worldie. But on 4 or 5 minutes, we have that incident where they were looking for a penalty against Virgil, where it's a coming together, and it's never a penalty. But Queeving Kelleher takes their player out of it. I think it's Pereira. It's a penalty. That was a penalty. And we had Ibu Kanate running around like he was Bambi on ice as well. It was a bit of a kind of comedy of errors, right from the start of the match. So this thing you were saying about, I think it's just so right. If you don't set your own tempo, if you don't start the way you're hoping to continue or even move up from that, it can be very difficult to get back into it. And we've had this trend, haven't we, of Arne Slot's second half reds. For a lot of this season, games have been very unimpressive in the first half, and we've come to expect that the turnaround will come in the second half. And look, there were some efforts in that second half, but you're never going to really be able to make up for a bit like Real Madrid last night against Arsenal. It was just too much concession. If you have a 14 or 15 minute period like we had, where you're going out of your way to present a team with chances, like what the Andy Robertson one. There's 3 separate efforts by him to make sure that lad scores. It's just really, it's hard to get your head around that level of what appears to be sloppiness. Yeah, and I suppose this is what, again, as in your position as an ex-player, I know the 85-86 title charge was not. There wasn't a big gap. If I recall, actually, he wasn't looking great at Christmas. No. But the 87-88 one, where all the new players were part of the team, was a little bit more in that way that they are today. Is that a thing that can happen? That the gap opens up, and when people are saying it's a matter of when and not if, is that something that can get to you, that you just maybe Scholes is right? Maybe there is like a subconscious arrogance, like we have this in the bag now, we just need to go through the motions. But there's more to it than that when you're playing a very, very, very effective team like Fulham.
Yeah, but what you just mentioned and the way you described it definitely exists in the game. There's absolutely no doubt about that. You kind of know, Trevor, when you're at it. So on Sunday, I'm at the Manchester derby, and you look at the two teams before the game and they do the huddle, and they're going through the motions, aren't they? Yeah. Manchester United are doing a huddle. They're trying to talk themselves up. This is a derby, we're playing against Manchester City. But you look at the players thinking, yeah, but it's been a shit season and they can't be bothered. And I'm looking at Manchester City and they're trying to wind themselves up. This is a Manchester derby, and they go, yeah, but we can't be bothered either because we're 5th or 6th. There's no jeopardy, is it? It's not really happening, is it? And I guess to a certain extent, that's what's happened to our season, isn't it? There isn't one result that will change the outcome of us winning the title, isn't it? So possibly we are just maybe just missing this. Make sure you're ready. We can't afford to drop points here today, you know what I mean? So yeah, maybe so.
Just one last thing on the Fulham thing, so we can sort of stop focusing on the negative, because I'm sure people are fairly spun out, and at this stage, one of our commenters there in the chats, Graham, says, "Do you think Endo's being utilised enough?" He says he's mystified by how few minutes that he gets, and I think it's a fair point. And I just wanted to use that as a sort of segue into a broader thing about how Slot is managing the squad. He seems to, we clearly can see that he has his team. He seems to have 4 lads who he trusts in midfield and no more. And one of them is being used as a right back. I had the feeling after the match, I have to say, and not for the first time in recent games, that maybe the manager was seriously overthinking it, in the way that he approached that match. A kind of square pegs and round holes approach. I can see a theory for why you would use someone who's a good ball retainer, someone who's comfortable on the ball at right back in a certain system to try and give you something approaching what Trent might give you. But painfully, obviously, if you're having a game where both Virgil and Ibu Kanate are struggling, you would like to think that maybe sooner rather than later, the likes of an Endo to screen in front of them will be introduced. But that doesn't seem to be a thing. And the story was breaking via Ornstein start of the week, I think, or towards the end of last week, about how midfield is not necessarily a priority. I think an awful lot of us are pulling whatever remains of our hair out at the thoughts of that, because if you can't see that Liverpool could really do with a bit of an enforcer and a defensive screener there, I don't know what to say to you. What do you think about the way he's managing his squad? You can almost predict that the forwards are going to get shuffled up on 60 and 70, and is it enough? Is he looking? Are we actually starting to see some of the shortcomings of the squad? Maybe can we let the manager off the hook in that regard, that maybe he just doesn't feel like he has enough quality and it is going to be a big summer? What do you make of the squad management and the rotation of the players?
I think it's never been as easy as this, Trevor. I always found it fascinating with Klopp, and the way he would talk all players up, and some players would hardly ever play, and they'd come in and then he'd talk them up as being the best players in the world. This guy doesn't do that. It's pretty clear that there is players in this squad that he doesn't trust. And I'm not a big fan of jumping on Arne Slot's back and going, why is Endo not playing it more? Because I need to know what he wants from his number 6. And I get a feeling what he wants from his number 6 because of what Ryan Gravenberch has given us for the majority of the season. And Endo is not capable of doing what Ryan Gravenberch does. He is capable, however, of doing a different job. And maybe a different job. We spoke about it last week, Trevor. We spoke about, should he have played Endo in the cup final? Were we more looking for that type of a player against them? And just coming on to Curtis, and you talked about, and Kenny Dalglish said the same to me when I made my debut at right back against Aston Villa, and I'm going, what do you mean right back? And he's gone, don't worry about it. He said, you'll be in possession all the time. You'll be able to do all your stuff and whatever. But you're not, Trevor, because it's a defensive position. But I feel that fullbacks is all about positional play. Positional play is so important. That's why I thought we'll get away with it against Everton. But to play as a fullback in an away game, I was not a big fan of that decision. And I have to be honest, and you will probably tell me the same thing, Trevor. I think we all thought this is an accident waiting to happen, isn't it? Curtis playing as a right back with the ball, not a problem, but there's a lot of work without the ball, isn't it? And he just didn't get that right. And in terms of Endo, yeah, it's a shame. But I think you're right with the midfield is not a priority, because that's kind of what we're hearing, isn't it? We're talking about possibly 1-2 fullbacks, maybe another centre half. There's going to be some upheavals up front, whether we like it or not, is there? So, yeah, midfield might not be a priority. And as it stands, he only trusts 4 of them. The 3 that play every week, and then Curtis, who changes every now and again with Shoppers Life. So interesting. It is very, very interesting. But surely, Arne Slot is a bright man. He will learn, and he might look back at some of the things this season and go, "We could have done that. We couldn't have done that different." It's almost like embrace every opportunity you have to rest players. It's not as important where you think, let's keep them in the rhythm, let's keep them at them. Let's save their legs every now and again.
Yeah, I mean, it's pointless going over it too much, because you and I have spoken about this specific topic before, and it is different now. But the history of Liverpool chasing, eagerly chasing, publicly chasing defensive midfielders in successive summers with big price tags attached to them, it's there for everyone to see. It feels a little bit like someone's trying to make you feel like you're crazy when you point that out. And this smug thing of, well, the midfield has been sorted because Ryan Gravenberch. it makes no sense. I mean, he's a super footballer, and they can do a really interesting job when they're shuffling between positions. But every squad should have someone like an Endo who's trusted, I guess, is my point. And Endo ain't, for whatever reason. The breaking news that we had just before the show, and this is on the back of hearing what was going on between, I think it was Lewis Steele and Virgil van Dijk at the weekend, where Virgil openly said that there was progress, that progress had been made in the contract talks, and then he got all evasive again. But he was very upbeat about it and sort of playful about it, talking about how much he loved the club, but these were internal discussions. And I think the contrast between that and when he was saying that anyone who's telling you it's done is a liar, that's pretty profound. I think everyone's excited about that. This evening, not Ornstein, but Paul Joyce is talking about the likelihood of Mo Salah being settled up with his contract quite soon. With both of them, the tendency seems to be going towards when it will happen as opposed to if it will happen. Now, that will have a knock-on effect in a massive way in terms of the money that's there to redistribute for changing up the team and making it more of Arne Slot's vision of Liverpool. But it's also, I think all of us will agree, pretty huge to have those two guys if you want to maintain a semblance of challenge next season with new fellas bedding in. So I think it's massive, Jan. Do you ever find yourself drifting towards the other side of the thing, which people were saying, well, maybe there could be big money brought in on the back of a Mo Salah transfer, and you know, the kind of guys who talk about ages and talk about paychecks as if it's their money, this type of thing. Where do you land with the news that it is actually looking quite hopeful that both of those guys will get done?
It's always exciting, isn't it, Trevor? New players, there's nothing that excites football fans like new players, being linked with potentially new players. You get excited, you're playing games in your head already, you're thinking, wow, this is what our team's going to look like next year. But I'm always very reluctant because when you have players at that level, where are those players at that level who are prepared to come to Anfield? Not because Liverpool is not a big club or whatever, but because they're elsewhere and they're locked into contract elsewhere, you know. So it's going to be difficult. So I'm always very reluctant to, you know, at every opportunity. I think a club like Liverpool shouldn't lose a player that they want to keep. You know, we should be attractive enough. We should be proactive enough to be able to keep players that we want to keep. And it's obviously clear that we want to keep Mo Salah and Virgil van Dijk. And the fact that the more trustworthy reporters are now suggesting, and it kind of works like, you know, somebody like Paul Joyce would have maybe heard something, been told something. He would then ring a trusted source at the club and say, I've heard. Now, the club is not about to lie about these things. You know, has there been a breakthrough? And the club, from within the club, they will say, yeah, it's certainly looking better than what it did maybe 4 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago. We're moving on, you know. Hence the reason that over the next, we know how it is, and it's like kind of that little group of trustworthy reporters, isn't it? And they all report the same sort of thing, isn't it? So we know we're heading in the right direction, that's for sure. I mean, just a funny, I don't know if I ever told you this story, Trevor, about how it worked in the old days with the reporters. So we had a little group of the Matt Darcy and Chris Wood, John Keith, and whatever, and they would hear something. And then they would ring Peter Robinson, you know, he was like the CEO, the chief executive of Liverpool Football Club. And they'd go, I've heard Liverpool are signing Derek Statham. Do you remember Derek Statham when we signed him from West Brom and he failed the medical? You might not remember that. Term,
I do.
I've heard a rumor. Yeah. I've heard Liverpool are signing Derek Statham. And Peter Robinson would just say, writing that story won't do your career any harm. You know, like, and honest to God, when you talk to them and say, you know, honest to God, Jan, sometimes we rang him every day, you know, for 3 months. He always answered the phone. He always gave an answer without confirming, but I'm not sure editor is going to be pleased if you write that. You know what I mean? And I just think it's fascinating the way that football used to be where there was a point of contact. It's a bit like when you're signing players, isn't it? You ring the opposition manager and go, can I buy A, B, and C or whatever it is? Now we go around the houses, don't we? And the reporters don't have any real links at clubs and whatever. I just love them stories. And you can imagine ringing up Peter Robinson every morning and go, I've heard so and so. I think that's fascinating, and it worked, didn't it? It worked. It kind of. I always think that Liverpool's it's been that type of a club, hasn't it? There's not as many leaks. There's not as many unnecessary rumours than we see maybe at some of the other clubs.
That's so fascinating that the point of contact used to be the pinnacle of the sort of the behind the scenes aspect of the club. That is remarkable. It reminds me of, I read a book, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, it's called Provided You Don't Kiss Me. It was written by a local Nottingham journalist about his time covering Forest, and during that time he developed a sort of a close contact with Brian Clough. Now, Clough might bollock him out of it one day. They might be drinking whiskey for 2 hours in his office the next day. That's the kind of way it was. And like you say, the access was more there. It was more right to the top. Whereas now, I don't know what you find, but when I'm hearing rumors, it's like, it's a journalist saying, like, I won't name any of the journalists, but some of the journalists, the rumors are like, well, the kit man at the club's auntie's cousin kind of thing. That's how different it is now. The contrast's quite stark. One last question on these contracts things and the potential impact of them on the squad. I've mentioned in a pessimistic way that maybe there won't be the same amount of funds now available to attract new players. But what will be there to attract new players is Virgil van Dijk and Mo Salah. And I'll tell you the most 2025 thing you've ever heard, Jan. In the immediate aftermath of Virgil talking about, looking forward to the future and loving the club, he put some social media post out. And guess who liked it? Milos Kerkez liked it, and everyone can see that. And so you're left thinking, well, why is he doing that? That's a bit weird.
Yeah.
And we all know that he is probably the most high-profile Premier League player that we're currently being linked with that seems believable. So that's a reason in and of itself, isn't it? Those two guys will attract people in the same way that Klopp and the aura he had would have attracted people last season.
Yeah, I mean, there could be no doubt that should Mo and Virgil re-sign, then we'll be looking to start next season being competitive, fighting for the title again. You lose them two players as well as possibly Trent going, and you're looking, and then then you have to convince players to come and convince the players that we can do this without these whereas especially if you sign from the Premier League or from other clubs who are in the Champions League, you don't have to sell Mo Salah or Virgil to them, do they? They played against them, they know what they're like. It's a bloody nightmare. And so yeah, it's massive. There's so many things that are important in terms of signing players, and it also sends the right signal, as I said before, to our fans, isn't it? I mean, Liverpool, if they want to keep a player, should be capable of doing that. So it just looks like good news is kind of around the corner.
It does, and like just for the final nail in the coffin, have you heard anything? Is there any more sort of local chat or chat amongst the higher echelons of the media that you would be working with around the Trent thing? Because his ongoing silence to me is the most obvious evidence that he is on his way, and it seemed to be all done bar the shouting there a couple of weeks ago, and then all we were hearing was, well, nothing signed yet. What's the feeling from the people that you've been speaking to with regard to Trent?
There was a feeling, and this is a couple of weeks ago, that, what do you think about Trent? And somebody said, if he's not joining Real Madrid, it's some job they've done on Real Madrid, innit? Making Real Madrid believe that he was coming, it would be some job that if he didn't go. So, yeah, it looks like it's heading that way. It's one of them things, isn't it? Every now and again you lose somebody you don't want to lose. It looks like he's made up his mind that he might want to try something else, in it. So we find somebody else and we go again, Trevor. I mean, that's another thing in it with Liverpool, isn't it? They plenty have left over the years. The club was always the most important. The star is the club, isn't it? Above any world-class football we might have, isn't it? And it'll be the same this summer.
Absolutely. And like you say, if we can hang on to those other two, then I think, we can look forward to another year of actually being relevant in the big pots. The biggest one for us, the only one that's available, all we've got left is the title, is still there. And I wanted to just talk to you about it in the bigger scheme of things before we look at West Ham, like we always do, narrow our focus down a bit, maybe talk about Arsenal as well, just in this regard. And, Liverpool's fixtures, you mentioned the comparatively winnable games coming up. We've got West Ham on Sunday, and that's a home game. And then it's Sunday. The one after that is Leicester away and then Tottenham at home. And we go away then to Chelsea. And I have a feeling, and I could be wrong, but as you look at the Arsenal fixtures, it's after going so well for them there now that I think they're going to be fine. The Brentford game, I don't know if it's going to be a massive deal for them to have to change things up too much. It probably changes very much that wonderful win they had last night at home to Real Madrid, ahead of their game against Real in Madrid on the 16th. But after that, they have Ipswich Town some 4 days later on the 20th. I can't see that presenting too much of a challenge. If they get past Real, however, then a semi starts to loom, and that gets right into everyone's brain. I don't care what anyone says. I think that will massively affect Arsenal, and they will have Palace and Bournemouth and ourselves ahead of them there. In terms of the next 3 games, because I keep trying to think, when can we potentially get this done? If we just assume that Liverpool will sort of default to some sort of version of themselves and say that, they should be 3 wins against West Ham, against Leicester, and against a Tottenham team who will have eyes on a different prize. Do you see it maybe being done before we're even expecting it, before the 11 points that are currently needed are actually needed to get racked up, because maybe Arsenal might drop a couple elsewhere themselves with their eyes on a different competition? How are you feeling about that, and when you think it might get done?
Well, if you look at what Arsenal did last weekend against Everton, where he rotated because of the enormity of the quarterfinal against Real Madrid, I can see him doing the same at the weekend against Brentford. I thought Brentford last away game at Newcastle when they lost 2-1. I thought they were really unlucky. I think they deserved to win the game. When you play Brentford, you have to be at it because they play with a lot of energy. They put you under a lot of pressure. And I just think that Mikel Arteta is kind of let his players and his fans know that we're going all in for the Champions League. We're going to take risk in the Premier League. We're obviously nobody hands anyone anything in it, but we're going to be resting players because this is our season now, isn't it? So I said it last time, Trevor. It wouldn't surprise me if it might get done against Spurs at home. I would prefer it to win it at Anfield. West Ham and Leicester should be pretty straightforward. And Spurs are not in great shape, so I can assure you of that. I just think that Arsenal have got a couple of games. You mentioned Palace and Bournemouth. They're not easy games either, are they? So possibly, Trevor, at the end of the month, who knows? Who knows, Trevor?
I mean, I'll take a showdown with Arsenal as a kind of a cup final to win it every day of the week, and I think a lot of people would. It'd be quite an exciting thing to have, but it would be lovely to think it might be done earlier because they might. Are you
after revenge, Trevor?
I'm a terribly
1989.
Small. Yes, man. I'm a terribly small-minded man. That comes back to my head straight away. First thing I thought about was like those bastards. That was one of the worst evenings of my young life, and it reminds me of a question I meant to ask you earlier on. So I'm watching Arsenal Real Madrid last night for my sins. I don't know why I did it to myself. And you gotta just take your hat off to those incredible strikes. You must have been there thinking, wow, that's just that. They were gorgeous. They were just gorgeously hit, beautifully struck balls. And they did get the third goal. So we can't just say it's just about the free kicks. That Marino goal is a good goal. It's a good team goal. I will tell you my honest reaction as I'm watching that is like, oh God, not them! Please, not them! I won't even hide it. The thoughts of any other English team, Premier League team, doing well in the Champions League. I'm not a big enough man to say good luck to them. It eats me alive, Jan, to see them do well. I'll be honest, but I don't know. Have you managed to maintain a bit more of a professional distance? Can you? I know, because like it's what you do. You watch games. You talk about these games for a living. Have you managed to get that little bit of a distance where you can go, oh, good for them, I guess? Because I'm not capable of it.
I quite like English teams in the Champions League, Trevor, because it makes my job so much easier. It makes my job so much easier. Most of the games will be pretty local. I know more about Premier League teams than I do about teams from the Bundesliga or Serie A or La Liga, whatever. So here's one question for you, Trevor. How do you feel then with Arsenal beating Real Madrid? That then guaranteed England 5 places in next year's Champions League. How do you feel about that then? Another English club gets to play in, I guess, what you call Liverpool's competition.
That part of it doesn't bother me at all. And if you want small-mindedness, let me lay this one. You're going to love this, because if you thought my attitude there was incredibly small-minded, when I heard about this, I was thinking, wouldn't it be fucking marvelous if we did get 5 and City missed out? Yeah. That's what I was thinking.
Well, surely you can see that, can't you?
I mean, them finish.
I can see that. Trevor,
I can see that.
Did you watch the whole of the game on Sunday?
Yeah.
Man United, Man City.
Yeah.
After Liverpool. I mean, fair enough to be disappointed with Manchester United, but they've had a terrible season, haven't they? But City, to play the way that they did, with no energy, with no intensity, the game's about scoring goals, and I'm not so sure, Trevor. I'm not sure I'm not sure they got enough. I just look at that team and I'm thinking, wow, Bernardo Silva, Kevin De Bruyne, or whatever, There's another thing that I wanted to say that before about Trent. Do you think there's a difference with Kevin De Bruyne has come out and said, I'm going? Or do you think that's a different situation because the club haven't offered him a deal and it's easy for him to say, well, I'm going? Whereas you said before, the biggest mystery with Trent is the silence.
I think it was put in stark contrast. The two things were put in contrast with each other, and there was a lot of narrative around the fact, well, here's a classy individual doing the classy thing. Yeah. And I'm reluctant to hammer any footballer when they're just, if you get a chance to grab the bag, and you guys from your generation must think about this all the time, with sort of just shaking your heads thinking, Jesus Christ, like the life-changing money these boys are on. It's very hard to judge a guy for making a decision like that. I will say there must have been some way of handling his communication, his contribution to this Real Madrid fiasco, which would have been a lot more respectful of the fans. That's what I would say, Jan. Do you think is that unfair?
No, I think that's about right, isn't it? And I also think that there is obviously certain things that disappoint fans, isn't it? He scored. Was it a West Ham? He scored the goal where he put his finger up to his mouth, and you kind of go, well, who was that aimed at? Was that aimed at the media speculating, pundits talking on TV or whatever? But it's difficult, isn't it? Because all we've done now for 8 months is guess, isn't it? We guess. We get very little to go on.
What we do have to go on are these remaining fixtures, and we start that run of 7 Sundays against West Ham, who are in 16th position on 35 points, level with Everton, who are in 15th, level on games played with Everton, only 2 points off Tottenham, who are in 14th with 37, and only 3 points off Manchester United, who are in 13th with 38. So it's not a massive gap just because West Ham are in that position between them and, say, United, or say even up as far as Brentford, who are a further 4 points away in 12th. That's when the gap does seem to start opening up a little bit. It's a disappointing season for West Ham, regardless of what way you look at it. Their most recent results, just for people who might not have been following, are quite interesting. They had a 2-2 with Bournemouth on Saturday. They got beaten rather at Wolves in the previous game, and they had a 1-1 with Everton in the game before that, and a defeat at Newcastle, a 1-0. Defeat to Newcastle at home, a 1-0. And their last win that they registered was against the even more lamentable Leicester City, who are pretty awful this year. And Ruud van Nistelrooy's experiencing quite the run as a manager there at the start of his Premier League career, if he is going to go on to have one. It's a very unimpressive run. And just to fill it out then, so that people know what we're talking about, most people have a good idea of a lot of the players. Their last game, the 2-2 with Bournemouth, they had Areola in goals, Todibo and Kilman at centre half. They had Scarlett and Wan-Bissaka at fullback in the fullback roles. Alvarez, Ward, Prowse behind Kudus, Souček, Paqueta and Bowen. A lot of really good quality footballers there. And on the bench, they could call on Carlos Soler. They had Nicholas Fulkrug. They had Mavropanos. Guilherme came on. Palmieri came on. Fabianski's there as well. Soufala's there. Rodriguez and Evan Ferguson. Sorry, I'm reading out the wrong side there. So, what when you think about this West Ham team and the challenge that they might pose, it's, you see a fella like Bowen. Kudus is a real talent. Paqueta is a player that City were being linked with. Thomas Souček was one of the most informed players in the league there for a period. They have good quality footballers that probably belie their current league position, Jan. It would be really lax of Liverpool to take anything for granted here. You can see how they could really threaten through some of those attacking players in particular. When you examine the challenge they'll pose us, what are the areas you're thinking of, both for them and what we might have to do to overcome that challenge?
Well, obviously, it's been pretty underwhelming for a group of players as good as the West Ham players to be where they are. And even since Graham Potter's gone in, he hasn't really been able to influence things to the extent where you think. And the one thing I look at is, if you look at them last year, I know they've had their problems with the terrible accident that Mikel Antonio had, and Nicholas Fulkrug has been injured more or less all season, so they kind of lack that focal point up front, isn't it? But when you look at last season, Mohamed Kudus had a super season. Lucas Paquetá had a great season. He's obviously got this thing hanging over his head with the betting on yellow cards. Jared Bowen last year was superb as well. And so I'm thinking, where is the West Ham player that's had a good season? Ward Prowse was loaned out to Forest, never played, and now they brought him back, and now he's playing this. So I just don't see any players who've stepped up and ran with it. Nobody's really helping the manager. So, and because of that, they become a bit of a grey team, I think. They kind of play. Obviously, Graham Potter has a clear way of the way he would like to play the game, isn't it? But it's not really happening. There's been a lot of great performances. Listen to the results that you mentioned before, isn't there? There's nothing to excite anyone in there. So it's very much a club that's looking forward to the end of the season 100%. So where can they hurt us? Yeah, of course they can hurt us with the quality they've got, and they might be motivated by a full Anfield, and the fact that Liverpool are going for the title. That might just be what kickstarts them. But in terms of quality, we have better players. Our teams perform better this year, and I expect us to. Got to be careful what we say now, Trevor. I expect us to somehow find a way of winning the game. It's something that we used to say early on in the season, when it's everywhere we said, I think we'll find a way of winning the game. And I think we're back to that on Sunday when we play West Ham. We will find a way of winning the game.
In relation to them, just as a club, there's a couple of interesting things there. You mentioned Graham Potter. I'm curious to hear your take on him as a coach. And he had that spell where he was so highly rated, and then got the Chelsea gig. And we all know that those kind of things can sometimes be a poison chalice, depending on who you're working with. And I don't think too many people would be getting excited about necessarily working with Chelsea's owners. They seem to be a law unto themselves. So I'm curious about your take on Potter and whether he's the heir apparent or whatever. And also then Jared Bowen, who's their most standout talent for a couple of seasons and was actually linked quite heavily with Liverpool a few times, and has done very well against us. He is such a dynamic footballer and he really has eye-catching ability. But unless I'm mistaken, I think he went 28 last December. So I'm wondering, this is the question I've got for you on him. Do you see that being that in terms of Jared Bowen, the Premier League player? Is he maybe gone a little bit old to make that final step to a genuinely, top end club? What's your feeling on both Potter and Bowen?
So Jared Bowen is pretty straightforward and pretty quick. I think he was strongly linked with Liverpool last time. When there was doubt about whether Mo Salah would sign his contract, and we were strongly linked with him because he fits in perfectly there. He's also a real threat in terms of scoring goals. But if you look at the way that the club sign players these days, what top club is going to go in and pay the type of money West Ham want for a 28-year-old? I just can't see it. So it more looks like this is what he's going to get. Graham Potter's a bit more difficult, I think. It's like very impressive, in terms of his coaching career, and the fact that he started off out in Sweden and did ever so well, came to Swansea, and obviously before he'd even settled in at Swansea, Brighton had seen something that they liked, couldn't wait to get their hands on him, and then again he did well at Brighton. I wouldn't say he did outstandingly well, but I thought he did well. But sometimes when managers are picked on like playing styles, and sometimes I lack this, can he win? Can Graham Potter win? And that's where I have my reservations. Can Graham Potter actually win? Is he a winner? Is winning important enough for him? Or is there other things that is important for him as well? So that's my big thing with Graham Potter. David Moyes, whatever you think of David Moyes, I believe he's a winner. And I think because he's a winner, he eventually got himself a trophy down at West Ham, didn't he, when they won the Conference League or whatever it was. There's one in there. I just don't quite see the same. I think David Moyes is in the game to win trophies. I don't know whether Graham Potter's in the game to win trophies. But he's in the game for something else and development, and buying young players and develop them and selling them, whatever. So that's my whole issue with Graham Potter. Take nothing away from his career. It's been pretty impressive. But just that, will he ever lift one?
Yeah, I think it's really spot on analysis. I enjoyed that. When you think about how Liverpool might look against West Ham at the weekend, we spoke about Curtis earlier on. I think if he starts, he'll probably be in the midfield if he's starting, because it would appear now that we have an actual right back. I was speaking to you earlier on about the Galaxy brain stuff from Arne, like how Kwanzaa didn't start that game is kind of beyond me, but he's there available to start the game as well. But do you think it's likely to be Bradley from the off? Would you see any other tweaks as well? Because he's looked at starting Jota a couple of games in a row, and it seemed to have paid off, where he scores the goal in a half decent outing, because if we're honest, he was pretty horrendous in the couple of previous showings that he had, but he was okay against Everton. Again, back to the same sort of ineffectual performance there at the weekend. Do you bring in Darwin Núñez? Has he been any better? I think his cameo there the last day was pretty awful. We're starting to look a little bit thin on the ground there, aren't we, when it comes to the options for actually banging in the goals? If Mo isn't doing it, the sad truth is that Cody Gakpo, who was our second most reliable guy, seems to be really taking a long time to get back into his stride as well. If you had to make any tweaks to the lineup, what do you think it looks like against West Ham? Because, each one of these is a cup final, and he's going to go with the strongest 11. What do you think that is?
Yeah, you feel that way, don't you? I mean, I'd be amazed if Conor Bradley doesn't return as a right back. and he'll probably give the two centre halves. I mean, he's never going to leave Van Dijk out. And Konate, although he's not playing well, I think he'll get another chance. The fact we're at home, he might consider Tsimikas. But I actually think that, apart from Robertson's performance against Fulham, I actually think he's done quite well of late. And in midfield, we're certainly looking leggy in midfield. It wouldn't surprise me if Szoboszlai is left out and Curtis Jones starts ahead of him. I think McAllister will start, and I think Ryan Gravenberch will start again. And then in terms of options up front, we still have the options, but the options are now out of form. And that's our biggest problem, isn't it? Our front guys are all out of form because whether we like it or not, you're just on the goals that you score, and they're not scoring at the moment. So Mo will play, Diaz will play, and then one more. I mean, could he go Gakpo on the left and Diaz centrally, which is an option, isn't it? Or could he want to give Shota another go at home after he scored in the last game against Everton? So I'm going to go Shota centrally and Luis Diaz left.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's likely to be it. But personally, I think I'd go with Gakpo and Diaz through the middle. Myself, I think that's what I'd like to see, because I'm not sure what's happening with Shota, but he just seems to be off it. It is interesting, isn't it, when you think about what he can do to change it up, because other squads who've been more heavily rotated would have the option of starting Federico Chiesa. They would have the option of starting Harvey Elliott in one of the advanced positions, or maybe even in one of the midfield positions, depending on how you're lining up and who you're going against. But neither of those guys, despite their looking really good when they come on the cup final, are likely to feature too much between now and the end of the season. And I wonder, and this is just our last little story on it, there are stories going around at the moment that Harvey Elliott is being sort of made available at a price tag of 40 million. And I think if you're not playing a lad like that, you can see how the club would start to think, well, that's good money that we could get in for someone who might actually be preferred or liked by the manager to start on a regular basis. The Chiesa and Elliott issues, we spoke about Endo earlier on. I think these are two slightly different ones. Chiesa because he's such a proven footballer on the big stage, and Elliott because he's so young. How do you see their futures panning out, Jan?
Yeah, again, I think if the right offers land for both of them, and I don't know what the right offer for Chiesa. I don't know whether they would even consider loaning out Chiesa because obviously the manager doesn't fancy him. Unless something dramatically happens in the summer, I can't see Arne Slot really using him, so they might even consider a loan. Harvey Elliott, I think at 40 million, I think that might be a big fee to turn down for Liverpool. Now, in terms of the team for the game on Sunday, I think if you're a Liverpool fan, Trevor, you see plenty of options. If you're a Liverpool fan, you'll go Bradley right back. Kwanzaa could even come in for Konate because of the way he's playing. You think Tsimikas could play instead of Robbo. Liverpool fans would have Endo in instead of Gravenberch. That wouldn't be a problem either. And then we've got the options. But I don't think Arne Slot sees that many options as we do. I think he's only thinking, what can I do at the back? Tsimikas or Robbo, that's it. In the midfield, Curtis Jones or Szoboszlai, and up front, and he's not keen on making changes in all three departments in it. So he doesn't see the same options as we do.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because we were sold on Arne's ability with his team to keep people fresh and fit, and then we just use the same 11 every week. It is quite interesting, and no one will give a crap, Jan, if the league gets won. So just to wrap us up here, as usual, we'll go to what we always do and have a look at what you think the score might be in the weekend's game.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll win. I think we'll find a way of winning. I think there might be one or two hairy moments. We might be a little bit like today's defenders. So I've got a feeling that West Ham will probably score. So I'm going to go with. We saw the magic of Anfield against Southampton. We'll come out for the second half, 1-0 down, bang, bang, bang. It was only 7 to 10 minutes, isn't it? But that's enough. And so I've just got a feeling that whatever is going to be needed, I think Anfield will give us a big hand helping with that. So 3-1.
3-1 we will take very, very happily. We just got to get back on track, Jan, and I think that's what all anyone wants. Get this thing done as soon as possible so we can actually celebrate it. I think it's fair to say there'll be an awful lot of people from my neck of the woods if it does happen, getting over, whether they're floating themselves over on bits of wood or going on the ferry or paying stupid amounts to get on a flight just to be in the city, considering how empty it felt the last time. There was that lack of connection. There's only so much you can get from watching a screen. So I think it will be a wonderful, wonderful time. And hopefully you and I can be having a celebratory pint somewhere around about that event. I think that would be something beautiful to look forward to. But we will be with you, Jan and I, all the way through the remaining fixtures from Sunday to Sunday until this thing gets done. And we just have to hope and assume that it will. So until the next time, from myself, Trev Downey, from Jan Molby, this is Molby on the Spot. We'll talk to you soon.